Welcome to Triple C Stories. Get ready for thrilling African folktales, filled with wisdom, adventure, and unforgettable lessons. Don't just watch, like, share, and subscribe to keep these stories alive. The first time Nneoma noticed the girl properly, it was 3:12 a.m. She had just rocked her baby back to sleep and was adjusting the mosquito net when the rustling sound outside drew her attention. Through the slits in the curtain, she saw her again, slender frame bent slightly, balancing a blackened kettle in one hand, a bundle of firewood in the other. It wasn't the first time she'd seen her at that hour, but something about this morning struck her. The girl moved quickly, her feet barely making a sound, her nightgown loose and stained from ash. She was small, almost fragile, but there was a discipline in her motion. She wasn't fumbling. She knew exactly what she was doing. It was as if the tasks were etched into her body. The girl lit the fire with practiced ease, arranged the sieve for pap, and began to stir the pot, all while the rest of the compound lay in silence. From her window, Nneoma watched, transfixed. Not with pity, not at first, but with a quiet ache in her chest. She didn't know the girl's name yet, but in her heart, she had already named her, the girl with the silent eyes. The compound was always alive by 6 a.m. Radios blaring, children running, someone always yelling someone else's name. But before the sun stretched across the courtyard, only two people stirred regularly: Nneoma and the girl. Every morning, the routine was the same. After the fire was set and the pap began to cook, the girl would tiptoe back inside, return minutes later with 2 heavy buckets of water. Then she'd sweep the compound in quick, neat strokes, stopping only when the first adult voices began to rise. She never spoke. Not even once. Nneoma began to time her feedings to coincide with those moments, just to watch. Not out of curiosity alone, but because watching her felt like reading the first page of a book you couldn't put down. She was painfully thin, her slippers always hanging loose at the heel, and her eyes, when they occasionally met Nneoma's, held no emotion, just endurance. And always after her chores, she would disappear into the Frederick's flat, as if vanishing into silence. Nneoma's mind constantly circled questions. Who was she to them? A niece? A house help? Why did no one else seem to notice her? One day, curiosity pushed Nneoma to ask her neighbor Nneoma about the girl. "Oh, that's Mora's girl," Nneoma said casually. "One of those village children they bring to help with housework. Her name is Nneka." No, Nneoma. That name stuck in Nneoma's head like a song lyric. Nneoma. Good mother. The irony wasn't lost on her. Nneoma shrugged and added, "That woman uses that child like generator. No rest. But you know Mara, always quick with her mouth. Try to correct her and she'll remind you that you can't even pay your own help's salary." Nneoma managed a small nod, her lips tight. She said nothing, but her insides were beginning to knot. There was something about that name, that girl, that felt heavier than it looked. And the way no one else seemed to care, or maybe pretended not to, made Nneoma's heart feel strangely burdened. Nneoma said nothing, but her heart tightened. That evening, as she walked past the Frederick's door, she caught a glimpse of Nneoma kneeling, washing a mountain of clothes as Mara's twin daughters painted each other's nails beside her. Kelvin, the youngest, sat nearby, licking a spoon of ice cream. No one acknowledged her. Not even the woman she called Auntie. As Nneoma entered her room, she turned to watch one last time. Nneoma looked up for a split second, and their eyes met. Just for a heartbeat. Nneoma's breath caught. There it was again. That same silence. That heavy, invisible silence wrapped in the gaze of a girl who had already learned how to vanish without leaving. The morning air was unusually tense. It had rained the night before, and the compound still held the smell of wet earth and rising heat. Nneoma was inside dressing her toddler when the shouting began. It wasn't loud at first, just a voice, breaking through the fragile calm of the compound. Then it rose, strong and guttural, echoing off the walls and bouncing through the doors. She moved to the window and peeked through the curtain. Mr. Frederick stood in the middle of the compound, barefoot, his shirt wrinkled and his chest rising and falling with each breath. His voice cracked with emotion as he spoke, not with rage, but with something deeper. Desperation. My wife will kill this child. I'm saying it now, in front of everyone. Let heaven and earth bear me witness. Whatever happens to this girl, my hands are clean. He looked around wildly, as if daring someone to contradict him. Nobody did. Doors creaked open. Faces peeked out. Silence fell over the compound, the kind that says, "We knew, but we didn't speak." Nneoma held her child tighter, her heart racing. She knew without question that something was shifting, and it couldn't be ignored anymore. Mr. Frederick was not a man who liked to speak in public. He was quiet, the kind to mumble greetings and retreat. But today, his voice trembled with something bigger than pride, pain. "I have begged her," he continued. "I have warned her. This girl is not a slave. She's just a child. Same age as our twins, 2 years older than Kelvin. Yet every morning by 3 a.m., she's outside, working like a machine while our children sleep like they're in a palace. This is wickedness." His words cracked open something in Nneoma's chest. She had thought the same thing many times but had never had the courage to say it like that. She stepped slightly out of her doorway, not fully outside, just enough to show that she was listening, that she heard him and agreed. A few other tenants did the same. Nneoma eventually emerged, arms folded, her lips curled in contempt. "Is it your child?" she snapped. "I'm feeding her, I'm clothing her, she's going to school. What else do you want from me?" Her voice was sharp, defiant. But even her anger couldn't drown out the truth hanging in the air like smoke. Nneoma stood behind her, quiet, her eyes locked on the ground. Her bare feet shifted slightly. Her hands clutched the hem of her faded dress. No one came to her defense. Not even the women who usually aligned with Nneoma. Everyone just watched, silent. Perhaps guilt gnawed at them too. Guilt from watching it happen every day and saying nothing. Frederick wasn't done. "Let her people come and take her. I can't watch this anymore. My wife has refused to change. So if anything happens to this girl, if she drops dead or runs away, I will not carry the blame." He turned abruptly and walked back inside, the slam of his door loud and final. Nneoma muttered to herself and stomped back into their flat, dragging Nneoma along. The compound buzzed quietly again, the moment settled, but something had shifted. A line had been drawn. That night, Nneoma couldn't sleep. Every creak outside made her chest tighten. She replayed Mr. Frederick's words over and over. She prayed, not just soft mutterings but real, desperate prayers. That this would lead to change. That someone would act. That Nneoma's story wouldn't just keep playing in silent suffering. And deep down, she wondered if she was meant to be the one to answer her own prayer. The morning arrived like a held breath, stretched long and quiet. Word traveled quickly through the compound. Someone had seen a woman at the gate asking for the Frederick household. A few neighbors leaned by their doorways, feigning disinterest, but everyone was listening. Nneoma's heart skipped. She peeped through her curtain and saw the figure walking in. The woman was slim and tired-looking, dressed in a simple blouse and a wrapper that had lost its color to years of washing. Dust covered the hem of her skirt. Her eyes scanned the yard carefully, uncertainly. In one hand, she held a black nylon bag, the kind used for hurried travel. There was something about her that stirred Amoka's memory, but it stayed just out of reach. Mora opened her door with dramatic flair. Her voice rang out sharp, like a bell striking metal. "Ah, Mama, you're here," she called out, clapping once. "You've come to see for yourself, ABI? Good. Come and look at your daughter. See how fresh she looks. Well fed. Even going to school. I'm doing more than you ever could." There was laughter in her voice, but no joy behind it, only defense. Only show. Only pride. She turned and called Nneoma. The girl came out slowly, dressed in a bright floral gown that looked like it was saved just for this occasion. Her face was washed and oiled, but nothing could hide the slight puffiness around her eyes or the way her lips trembled. The mother looked at her daughter, long and hard, as if trying to read a secret behind her clean clothes. Nneoma stood still, hands by her side, her gaze bouncing from her mother to the floor. "Does she look maltreated?" Mora asked, almost smug. "You people forget how she was looking when you brought her here. Now see her. I'm even the one doing charity, feeding your child when my own 3 are here." The mother said nothing. Not at first. Just took in the sight. Then she opened her mouth, slow and firm. "Let me talk to my daughter." Mora hesitated, then rolled her eyes and stepped aside. And then it happened. Something Amoka would never forget. Nneoma turned to her mother, held the hem of her wrapper, and whispered, "Mummy, I don't want to stay here again. Please don't leave me here. I want to stay with Auntie Amoka." The words fell like a stone into a silent pond. Everyone heard it. From the women pounding yam in the next building to the children playing under the staircase. The compound went still. Her mother blinked, confused. "Auntie who?" she asked. "Auntie Amoka," Nneoma said again, louder this time. "She lives just one door away from us." Her voice cracked slightly, but she stood her ground. Her mother turned slowly toward Amoka's room, and Amoka, who had been rooted just behind her door, felt her knees weaken. She had heard every word. Her chest swelled with something she couldn't name. Fear, love, responsibility. She waited, heart racing. A knock came. Gentle, uncertain. She opened the door. What met her eyes made her mouth fall open. The woman at the door stared at her in disbelief, and then, almost at the same time, they both said each other's names aloud, eyes wide with recognition. There had been a time many years ago, when this same woman's husband had paid Amoka's school fees. The memory rushed back like warm rain. They stood there, stunned, hands over their mouths, before slowly stepping forward into an embrace filled with old gratitude and new hope. The moment the two women embraced, it was as if the years melted away. Amoka clung to her cousin tightly, the fabric of her wrapper damp where tears had fallen. Neither of them could speak at first. There was too much, too many years lost, too many unspoken questions, too much emotion compressed into one fragile doorway. When they finally sat down inside Amoka's room, they didn't start with Nneoma. They started with stories. "I thought I'd never see you again," the mother whispered, eyes glossy. "You remember how my husband used to say you were destined for something great?" Amoka nodded, smiling through tears. "He paid my WAEC fees when my father couldn't," she replied. "I still remember the envelope, how he handed it to me quietly and said, 'Don't waste this chance.'" The room held a sacred kind of silence after that. Outside, the compound buzzed with whispers, but inside, something gentle and sacred was unfolding. Nneoma sat quietly near the corner, eyes darting between the two women. Her face was unreadable, but her body had relaxed. She was no longer standing on edge, no longer waiting for the next command. For the first time, she looked like a child again. Eventually, they turned to the matter at hand. Nneoma's mother looked at her daughter, then at Amoka. When she said she wanted to stay with you, I didn't understand, she said softly. But now I do. I didn't recognize you outside. I was too tired, too worried. But the moment I saw your eyes, she shook her head, her voice faltering. I knew she would be safe here. Amoka reached out, touched her hand gently. She will be more than safe. She will be loved. The woman's eyes filled again, but this time with something lighter than sorrow, relief. If you mistreat her, she said, attempting a smile through the weight in her throat, you are mistreating your blood. Amoka placed her hand on her chest. I swear on my children, I will care for her like she is mine. Nneoma looked up at that moment, and something changed in her face. Her eyes, always so guarded, so worn, now shimmered with something new. Hope. She didn't say a word, but the way she leaned against Amoka's side said everything. In that quiet act, trust was planted like a seed. By the time Nneoma's mother stood to leave, the sun had shifted higher, casting bold streaks of light across the compound. Mora watched from her doorway, her expression unreadable. She said nothing. Didn't greet, didn't wave. Her arms folded tightly across her chest, her lips thin. The energy around her was stiff with unspoken frustration. Her household suddenly seemed smaller, as though something valuable had slipped out through the cracks. As Nneoma followed her mother to the gate, Amoka trailed behind, carrying a small nylon bag of folded clothes. At the gate, the mother turned back one last time. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not closing your door when my daughter knocked. Amoka nodded. Sometimes that's all we need, an open door. They embraced once more, and Nneoma clung to Amoka's side as they watched her mother disappear down the road. That night, Amoka gave Nneoma her own soft wrapper to sleep in. She shared her children's bathwater, gave her the bigger plate of food, and let her sleep beside her baby. For the first time in many years, Nneoma fell asleep with her face resting on a warm chest, not a cold floor. And Amoka, listening to her soft breathing, smiled into the dark. The first morning felt unreal. Nneoma woke up slowly, unsure at first where she was. The faint cooing of Amoka's baby filled the room, followed by the gentle clinking of spoons and a soft humming from the corner. It took a moment to remember. She wasn't in Mora's house anymore. She wasn't sleeping on a cold mat by the kitchen door. She was in Amoka's room, wrapped in a clean floral wrapper, her head resting on a pillow that smelled of lavender soap. She sat up cautiously and looked around. The light streaming through the curtain was warm. There was no yelling, no rush. No one was calling her name. For a long time, she just sat there, hugging her knees and listening to the peaceful hum of the morning. It felt like breathing deeply for the first time after holding her breath for years. When Amoka noticed she was awake, she smiled. Good morning, my Nne, she said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. Nneoma managed a small, unsure smile. Amoka led her to the bathroom, showing her where to find her towel, her soap. There was no barked command, no hurried instructions. Just calm. Later, she made her a plate of yam and egg, set it on the table, and sat with her as she ate. Nneoma chewed slowly, unsure if she was meant to finish it all. Eat, my dear, Amoka said gently. There's more if you want. Something about those words loosened a knot in her chest. It was kindness she wasn't used to. Kindness without strings. That afternoon, she played quietly with the baby, and for the first time in years, She laughed without flinching. The sound was small, but it carried through the room like sunlight. Outside, the compound wasn't quite the same anymore. Mara barely stepped out. Her children, once used to lounging and ordering Nneoma around, now fetched water themselves and swept with sluggish reluctance. A few tenants watched the shift with raised brows but said nothing. Amoka noticed the change, but she didn't comment. She had her own small world to tend to now, one where Nneoma was beginning to blossom. The girl no longer walked with her shoulders hunched. She folded clothes beside Amoka, sang softly while sweeping, and asked questions with curiosity, not fear. Amoka began showing her how to cook little things, how to peel yam properly, how to rinse rice. They did it together, laughing over spilled water and lumpy akara. These weren't chores anymore. They were moments. Nneoma started sleeping better. She started humming. And every evening after prayers, she would sit beside Amoka, lean gently against her, and close her eyes. Not because she was exhausted, but because for once, she felt safe. Amoka decided it was time. Nneoma had blossomed enough to start school again, this time properly, without interruption or exhaustion. She took her to a modest private school about 20 minutes away. The compound's children wore green and white uniforms, their laughter filling the air as they dashed around before assembly. Nneoma stood beside Amoka, clutching her hand tightly. "You'll wait till I go in?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Amoka squeezed her hand and nodded. Always. That first day, she sat quietly in class, her hands folded, eyes darting around nervously. But as the days turned into weeks, Nneoma began to settle in. Her teachers noticed her quick mind and her quiet way of solving problems others stumbled over. She never raised her hand too high, but when called upon, she answered with surprising clarity. Back at home, the rhythm between her and Amoka deepened. The toddler saw her as a sister now, one whose back he crawled onto uninvited, one who kissed his forehead and rocked him to sleep. Amoka began to trust her with more. Grocery lists, simple errands, even watching the baby for an hour while she cooked. In return, Nneoma gave laughter, peace, and presence. She started reading storybooks to the baby, sometimes fumbling, sometimes flowing. Her favorite part of the day became evening, when they would all gather in the parlor, Amoka's husband included, to pray, talk, or listen to the soft voice of the radio. There was no more hurrying, no more sharp commands. Nneoma had found something precious in Amoka's home, a sense of belonging, of being seen not just for what she could do, but for who she was. Then came the letter. Folded neatly in Nneoma's bag, it was from the school. She had been selected to represent her class in a regional math competition sponsored by Cowbell. Amoka read it aloud and gasped, her eyes shining with pride. "You see yourself," she teased gently. "Our quiet one is a champion." Nneoma looked unsure. "What if I forget everything? What if I fail?" Amoka took her face in her hands. "My darling, it's not about whether you win. It's about knowing you belong there." The days that followed were filled with preparation. The school provided textbooks, her teacher gave extra time after class, and Amoka made sure she ate well and rested. On the morning of the competition, Amoka ironed her uniform, tied her hair into 2 neat puffs, and walked her to the gate. Nneoma looked back 3 times. Each time, Amoka was still there, smiling, hand raised. It wasn't the loud cheering of a crowd, but it was all the courage she needed. When the news came, it arrived without fanfare. No trumpets, no television crew. Just a white envelope sealed with the school's letterhead and delivered by the principal herself. Nneoma had not only won the math competition, she had topped the region. And now, Cowbell wanted her as their teen ambassador. Amoka sat on the edge of her wooden chair, holding the letter, reading it 3 times before she could speak. Her husband stood behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder, silent but beaming. The reward was more than they could have imagined. Over 3 million naira a year, full sponsorship for Nneoma's education, and an offer to relocate the family to a better home, furnished and paid for. Amoka's lips trembled as she whispered, "God, so this is how you remember the forgotten." Nneoma stood by the doorway, uncertain. "Is it good?" she asked. Amoka turned to her and opened her arms. Nneoma ran into them and buried her face in her chest. "It's more than good," Amoka said. "It's your miracle." Moving Day was quiet but emotional. The compound watched in disbelief as a modest cowbell-branded van pulled up. Uniformed movers carried boxes out of Amoka's room, while Nneoma walked beside them holding a small bag of her books. Mora stood in her doorway, arms crossed, her face unreadable. She didn't say a word, not even as Amoka nodded politely in passing. Her eyes followed Nneoma, not with affection, but with a flicker of something else, regret, perhaps. The other tenants helped where they could, offering water, helping lift bags, and several women came over to hug Amoka and bless the child. The new apartment was unlike anything Nneoma had known. A proper kitchen. Her own bed. A table just for homework. Amoka's husband bought a radio for the parlor and new curtains for Nneoma's room. They didn't try to make the moment bigger than it was. They just let it be. Peaceful, joyful, quiet. Years passed gently, like pages turning in a well-loved book. Nneoma grew steadily, with bright eyes and quiet confidence. She never lost her softness, but she gained strength. She worked hard, loved deeply, and continued to give more than she took. Her mother visited often, always bringing something from the village, groundnuts, palm oil, dried fish, and always leaving with tears of gratitude in her eyes. When the time for university came, she chose medicine. "I want to heal people," she said. Amoka simply kissed her forehead and said, "Then go heal, my daughter." The day of her convocation arrived like a sunrise. Nneoma stood tall in her white coat, her name called out clearly across the auditorium. She turned and found Amoka in the crowd, standing with her husband and children, eyes brimming with tears. When it was over, she walked to her and whispered, "Thank you, Mother." Amoka smiled, her voice shaking as she replied, "No, thank you, Doctor." Years later, Nneoma returned to the compound where it had all begun. Not in worn slippers or with a bundle of firewood, but in a sleek car that bore the logo of her own private pediatric clinic. She had brought her husband, also a doctor, and their 2 young children to see where Mummy grew up. Amoka stood proudly at the gate, still vibrant, still warm, her arms outstretched. Time had touched her gently, her wrinkles filled with stories and laughter. That day, Nneoma handed her a small envelope. Inside was the deed to a new house built in Amoka's name, with a note that read, "For the woman who opened her door and gave me a future." Amoka cried openly, the kind of tears that come when dreams long buried finally bloom. Amoka's children thrived too. Her son, now in university, studying engineering on a scholarship Nneoma had quietly arranged. Her daughter, preparing for medical school, mentored by Nneoma herself. Their family had transformed, not by miracles alone, but by quiet love and the kind of kindness that ripples across generations. At every family gathering, at every celebration, Nneoma always found a moment to sit beside Amoka, to rest her head lightly on her shoulder like she did years ago, and say, "It all started here." And Amoka, smiling into the soft glow of the evening, would reply, "No, my dear. It started the moment you looked back and chose love." Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe to Triple C Stories. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section and stay tuned for more exciting stories.